Well, hello again. Here we are. We are reading through the book of Deuteronomy together this week, and today we come to chapter 4. Now, you will remember for the first 3 chapters, Moses is essentially retelling the story of Israel's experiences as they journeyed through the wilderness. Now we get to chapter 4, and Moses pivots a little bit and he kind of stops telling the story and he begins instead to instruct, to remind, to command, to challenge the people as they're about to go into the promised land, to make sure that they continue to live in obedience to God. This is how chapter 4 begins. O Israel, Moses says, listen to the statutes and the rules that I am teaching you, and do them that you may live. Right at the start of Israel's journey in the wilderness, Moses went up on to Mount Sinai, and there God gave him the 10 Commandments and a whole other body of laws that was supposed to direct and shape the life of Israel. And Moses says here, listen, when you go into the promised land, be careful that you continue to live in obedience to all of God's laws, so that you may live, Moses says. It's interesting when people read the Old Testament and they read God's law and God's rules, oftentimes they imagine that God is like this really mean-spirited, tight-fisted being who's given humans all of these laws because he wants them to be miserable and he wants to suppress them and control them. That's often the way that people think about God's laws, especially in the Old Testament. But here Moses says the opposite. Moses says to the people, look, be careful to obey all of God's word so that you may live. You see, all of God's laws, back then and today, all of God's commands, all of his rules, they're all designed to lead human beings into a greater experience of life. Everything God says to us, everything God asks of us, everything God demands of us, it's all so that we can grow in a greater experience of life. And that's what Moses says as the people are about to go into the promised land. He says, listen, if you want things to go well for you, do what God says. But that's not the only reason the people were supposed to live in obedience to God's law. If you move on in chapter 4, it says this. Where are we? Chapter 4, verse 5. Moses says, I have taught you these statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who, when they hear all of these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this law that I have set before you today? So verse 1, Moses says, go, keep God's commands so that you may live. And here in verse 5 and following, Moses says, if you do keep God's commandments, understand that the surrounding nations will be looking on. And when they see you living in obedience to all that God has said, they will be stunned. They will be amazed at the wisdom and the understanding and the beauty of all that God has done and all that God is. And the same is true today. It holds true for us just as it did for them. If we live in obedience to God, if we follow Jesus and do what he asks us to do and do what he tells us to do, well, then we will grow in our experience of life. But also as we do that, people who are around us will look on, and they will see something of the beauty and the wisdom and the purity and the greatness of the God that we follow. You see, obedience is not just for our benefit, it's for the benefit of the world as well. This is what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, listen, when you do these good deeds, people will look and they will praise your Father who is in heaven. So obedience is for you, it's also for your neighbor. It's for us, it's also for those around us. So perhaps you can reflect on that a little bit more today, and I will see you again tomorrow for Deuteronomy chapter 5.